Well, today on the show, I'm joined once again by Professor Michael Huemer. Professor Huemer joins us to talk about his new book, Progressive Myths. This book explores what progressive myths are, and this conversation explores a battle that is taking place within our culture for meaning. The book and the conversation try to explore the differences between truth and ideology. It's a really interesting book, and hopefully this conversation does just give you a nice overview of this subject matter. And if you do enjoy it, make sure you pick up the book. It's highly worth reading. Professor Huemer does a really fair and great job, I think, of surveying the landscape, and that's precisely what we need to do to have a more open, more critical, and more rounded view of the society and culture and the different political topics that are raging within it. If it's your first time checking out the show, I'd ask you to press the subscribe button, and if you're on YouTube or Rumble, select the bell notification icon. That's going to remind you whenever we release a video here on the channel. And everybody, if you wouldn't mind giving it a thumbs up, sharing it with your friends, your family, your followers, we grow because you take the time to share our content. So please do share this with anybody who you think would like an overview of the progressive myth landscape. Okay, enough of that. Enjoy this conversation with Professor Michael Huemer. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the show. My name's Samuel. Today I'm joined once again by Professor Michael Huemer. Mike, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi Sam, it's great to see you.
I'm quite excited, as always. This is the fourth time that we'll be speaking. Today we're going to be talking about your newest book, Progressive Myths. Very, very excited to dive into this one. You published it fairly recently, and it's been fascinating to see some of the responses online on your Substack. I want to dive into some of that towards the end of the conversation around potential controversy, I guess, or the risk of cancellation for you for publishing something like this, if there is any. But before we dive into that, there's a whole host of questions. I want to kind of walk us through kind of understanding what progressive myths are, cultural and societal traits, philosophical underpinnings, and then the risks and consequences about talking about this specific subject. So if you wouldn't mind, could you kind of break down what a progressive myth is, and can it fall on both sides of the political spectrum?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I mean by progressive myths is these are factual beliefs that are widely shared by progressives that appear to strongly support some element of progressive ideology, but that are objectively factually false or highly misleading. Okay, and by highly misleading, I mean there's some other context that if you knew it, it would result in you drawing pretty much the opposite conclusion or a completely different conclusion from the one that you're supposed to get, the one that you draw if you don't know that background, okay? And now, are there myths on myths for other ideologies? Of course there are, right? Like there are conservative myths. I mean, they wouldn't be called progressive myths. They'd be called conservative myths or populist myths or something like that. You could wonder, why did I not do books about them? But I'm more annoyed by the progressive myths, and partly because I see a lot more of them. And this might be partly because of my particular whatever subculture of, living in the academic world. But also, I think the progressives have just been doing a much better job of putting forward their myths. It's like they just have control of a lot more media and cultural institutions, education. They have control of the education system. They have control of the arts, and just like so. And there's just like so many of these things that you hear that sound like relevant political facts that are not really.
I guess it'd be interesting to understand kind of why you think progressive myths end up holding such a sway over people's perceptions in the way that they conceive and view themselves and the world around them. Like, what is it that enables them to be so powerful?
Yeah, I mean, so it's partly like, as I was saying, that the left has kind of taken over the cultural institutions. And so, and it's like, it's not just the media. It's like they have the academic world, they have like the colleges and universities, but I think like even in high schools and even before then, people are being taught these things. And then like Hollywood, like almost everyone in Hollywood is on the left, and so like they can make movies that dramatize their worldview, and then that's what makes it seem compelling. But like that. I mean, the basic thing is like most people are not trying very hard to get the truth. They want a particular narrative, and so they want to consume the content that supports the narrative that they want to hear. So like, yeah, it's compelling because you're not trying to look for what might be wrong with it.
I think it's tricky as well because, even the sort of concept of truth within the sort of popular landscape has been bastardized, you could potentially say. Like, you have your truth, I have my truth, they have their truth, and we all live by our own experiences and our own truths. It must be pretty hard to actually prove a progressive myth false when the reality that even truth itself is under threat. Don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I get irritated when people use the word truth, when they misuse the word truth to mean something completely different, like what somebody believes, whether truthfully or falsely, right? Because that's what's happening when somebody talks about my truth and your truth. They're implicitly using the word truth to mean belief, right? This is a colossal confusion, right? Like what you believe and what's true are totally different, and confusing those is just like, just just ruining your mind. Okay, but anyway, yeah, but at the beginning of the book, I said I wrote this because I think that truth matters, and I was a little bit hesitant in writing that because the people who go around talking about truth and how important truth is are usually liars. And like Truth Social is not really about advancing the truth, right? And I suppose they call the posts on Truth Social truths, right? So anyway, I was a little hesitant about saying that, but that was literally what I meant. So I'm not going to abandon the concept of truth. Anyway, okay. Now I'm not sure if I answered what your question was, but I just ranted for a while about truth. Yeah. I guess I will say by truth I mean the stuff that corresponds to reality. Like you say that something in the world is a certain way, and that thing is that way. That's truth. And if the thing is not the way that you said it is, then what you said was false. Right? That's the real concept of truth.
That's a fair definition. Yeah, for sure. And I think, we could use a sort of Orwellian term such as groupthink. And kind of the reality is that I think groupthink and loyalty really affect what people or what people believe, but it kind of comes before that, sort of why they want to believe certain narratives. So I think it'd be interesting, we would kind of mention that there's sort of narrative people wants to believe, but kind of, do you think that it's not just an individually psychological problem that creates this, but actually the fertile ground is almost set in place for myths to take hold because of the collective groups of individuals that want to have certain narratives pushed to the forefront?
Yeah. So I mean, like part of what influences people's political beliefs is they have individual personality traits that make them attracted to some story about society. But it's also partly that people have joined a group, and when you join a group, you realize that your group is supposed to believe a certain thing, and therefore you're supposed to believe that thing. Okay, and you can tell that this is having a big influence because periodically the thing that a group believes changes, right? So throughout most of my life, the Republicans were the hardline anti-Russian party. It was the Democrats who were saying, no, we need some kind of rapprochement with the Russians, and and the Republicans were like, no, never trust those people. Okay, and then it just flipped on a dime because the leader of Russia supported a Republican presidential candidate. Okay, so then just because that guy, okay, he's the leader of our group, so now we're all like soft on Russia, right?
So you kind of made the point that truth is kind of that which is kind of conforms to reality, and anything that kind of claims to be true but doesn't conform to reality is obviously not true. I think it'd be helpful just to drill down to this idea of truth just a little bit more before we push forwards. Why do you think people want to prioritize ideological narratives over truth? Surely orienting your life towards a pillar of truth is going to give you better credence, better certainty, better direction, better outcomes. So why is it that the ideological narratives kind of have the opposite effect of polarizing people away from truth?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crucial that there's a difference between your normal beliefs in your personal life and your political beliefs. And the difference is that in your personal life, you generally have control. And that means that you pay a cost for being irrational or just for being wrong. Okay, so if I, like trivial example, like if I have false beliefs about where the supermarket is, then when I want to get food, I'm going to pay a cost. Like I'll be wandering around and I won't get the food. Okay, but if I have false beliefs about, what is the best immigration policy or something, I will not personally pay a cost for that. And there's like some tiny chance that I would actually have an influence on public policy, like, like a 1 in 10 million chance that maybe an election will turn on my vote, okay? Something like that. And so basically I should expect that to never happen in my lifetime. Okay, and so, but, it's a 1 in 10 million chance of imposing a cost on all of society. Like if I flip the election to the worst candidate, then I impose a cost on all of society, not on me personally. Okay, so like the total expected cost, so there's a tiny probability that I affect policy adversely, and the expected cost is greater than the expected benefit, but the expected cost is almost all on society as a whole, not on me personally. And the benefit to my having the false or irrational belief all goes to me. And what's the benefit? The benefit is like emotional. I get to believe what I want to believe. Okay, so I get all of the benefit of that, and then I'm imposing a small risk on society, but that goes to other people, almost all to other people. So that's the basic reason why people are less reasonable about politics, right, than about their personal life.
Yeah, I mean, we could use the example of injecting nicotine into your bloodstream over smoking and getting nicotine in that way. Injecting nicotine is going to kill you. Smoking isn't going to kill you straight away. Obviously, nicotine being the drug that kind of makes you addicted to cigarettes. What I find interesting is there seems to be the sort of problem that arises when you're trying to debunk or unmystify a sort of progressive myth, that actually it's sometimes harder to show that objective truth is demonstrably obtainable or knowable when it comes to fundamental human questions. So we could kind of say, that obviously fundamentally it's very easy to prove that injecting nicotine is going to kill you, whereas smoking is going to kill you, but the nicotine is coming in a much different way, and actually it's probably the toxins that are going to do the damage, right? Whereas, as you've already mentioned, things like, immigration, or we could use any other public policy we want to go down this road, it seems harder to prove that the progressive myths and the narratives that are behind them are in and of themselves false. And obviously your book goes into a whole plethora of progressive myths. Do you think it's fair to say that it is just a harder bar to reach to prove a progressive myth over a personal truth? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the specific question.
Sure.
So in the book, I tried to focus on things that are relatively decisively decidable, right? Relatively decidable. So, if there's a question like, can socialism work? That's going to take a while. It's going to take a while to address that, and you're going to have to marshal a lot of evidence. And, we got a lot of evidence from like the Soviet Union and the Eastern Europe, whatever, but then people are going to say, oh, no, that wasn't true socialism, whatever. And so it's okay. But I tried to focus on, things that were sort of simpler. Okay, so like, are women really paid significantly less than men for the same work? Okay, that's relatively circumscribed. Okay, and like there's a broader claim like, oh, is our society sexist? How am I going to resolve that? Because that's so broad, and there's just like, there's no end to how many things that you could count as examples of sexism. But if you pick a particular one, like, are they actually paid less than men? Well, actually, there's social science evidence on that. Like, you can look at the salaries or wages of men and women, and then you could try controlling for things like years on the job and years of education and hours worked and whatever occupation, and then it turns out that after controlling for those factors, the wage gap disappears. So the answer is no. Women are not paid less than men for the same work. they're paid less than men for different work, right?
Yeah, and we'll leave it. We'll leave it to the audience to go away and pick up your book to dive further into some of the statistics and details that you give for that.
Yeah.
We kind of touched on universities. I think it'd be good just to linger on academia a little bit more. There's sort of a sort of general consensus, I think, within society at the moment that there's been an erosion of our institutions. We can use universities because that's what you're closest to home right now. So do you kind of describe the academy as the origin of woke ideology? Would you mind kind of defining what wokeism is, and how has academia and the structure of academia enabled the rise of ideological extremism?
Yeah. What is wokeism? I mean, so this is like a, I don't know, it's a slight digression into epistemology. When somebody asks you to define something or like what something is, there's a couple of things that might be going on, right? Like one is sometimes a person really does not know what you're talking about. Okay. Now, I assume that's not the case with your audience. And maybe there's some people who are like in foreign countries and they actually don't know what this word means. Okay. And then what I should do is just give some examples. Like, okay, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's kind of woke and whatever. And then like Ibram Kendi, and then like talk about things that Ibram Kendi says. Okay, on Robin DiAngelo. Okay, those are woke people. The other thing is there's somebody who knows what you're talking about. Like they've seen examples of it, but they want you to say something about what you think is the essential characteristic of that. Like what do I see as the most important thing about this phenomenon that we've all seen? Okay. And the answer to that is I basically think wokeism is reverse bigotry. That is, so our society has a history of bigotry of different kinds, like prejudice against black people, prejudice against Latinos, prejudice against women. Okay. Wokeism is just taking that prejudice and reversing the direction of it. So we used to have white people being prejudiced against blacks. Now let's have prejudice against whites instead. Let's have racism against white people. Let's have sexism against men. Right? Let's have prejudice against heterosexuals. And so, right? That's the essential thing that's going on, I think.
I think that's really helpful. You also kind of compare progressivism to a sort of quasi-religious movement, which I think is quite a helpful way of diving into it, where people have to almost affiliate themselves by saying certain things, performing certain rituals potentially, and kind of adhering to the sort of prophets of that religion. You already mentioned D'Angelo as somebody that some people might have to adhere to kind of be on the sort of bandwagon. Would you mind kind of just breaking down kind of progressivism and its kind of quasi-religious element as well?
Yeah, so John McWhorter has been saying that wokeism is a new religion. Like he says, it's not just like a religion; it's literally a religion. I'm not sure it's literally a religion, but it is like a religion. And how is it like a religion? So religions serve psychological functions for human beings. So people have a need for a sense of meaning in life, and they have a need for a sense of community. And so, like the community is a group of people with sort of like shared values or shared goals or something like that. Okay, and so that used to be satisfied. Those needs used to be satisfied for most people in our society by religion, especially Christianity. But also we're open to many different religions. So okay, but religion is on the decline. But now something else has arisen to fill those needs, which is ideology, political ideology, right? And so so like the woke progressives. They get a sense of meaning and a sense of sort of their place in the world, right? Because this thing, like the belief system tells you all about like, society, how society works and how it's a struggle between good and evil, right? Which is kind of like what most religions tell you. And of course, you're on the side of good. And it tells you which group is the evil, the enemy, so that you can just sort of like orient your life towards that, right? And then you have this group of like-minded people, which is the other people sharing your ideology. And so you have a feeling that you're all part of this group working for this common goal. Okay. And then, and a lot of the time when people refer to something as religious that isn't literally religious, they're thinking about kind of like the belief forming methods and maybe the belief retention, right? They're sort of suggesting that the people are dogmatic, right? Which also applies to progressive ideology. Like, a lot of it is sort of like, you have an article of faith. There's stuff that you're just supposed to believe that you're not supposed to ask for evidence for. and that people don't ask for evidence for. And if somebody attempts to give evidence against it, they get upset, right? They react not just like, I disagree with you, but more like they think you're evil, right? Which is how Christians used to react. I don't see this today, but like, looking at history, like Christians used to react that if you questioned their belief system, you were evil, like you're serving Satan, and then you could be burned at the stake and stuff like that. So, okay, and luckily the progressives are not burning people at the stake, but it really does seem like they have some of the same emotional reaction, right, that religious people have towards blasphemy.
Yeah, I'll make sure that John McWhorter's book, Woke Racism, is linked in the description. So, listener viewer, that'll be there, as well as obviously Professor Huemer's book. So check those out. This wasn't one of the questions I passed over to you, but it's one that I think would be fascinating just to look at briefly, which is this idea that kind of progressivism is a sort of quasi-religious element. I kind of feel like, I've got my fingers on the pulse of sort of religious trends online, especially within my Western space, Christianity. And there seems to be a very heavy push and rise within Christianity coming back to the fore, especially sort of a fundamental form of Christianity, something like Catholicism or Orthodoxy seem to be on the rise, at least in the circles where I've been exploring this sort of stuff. I'd be interested to kind of get your take on this. Do you think that people are trying to push back against progressive narratives by reallocating or redirecting themselves towards sort of classic religious doctrines? Do you think that's a way that people are trying to combat this?
Yeah, that seems really plausible. Like, I haven't looked into that per se, but it seems plausible, and it feels like people have that reaction. Now, like, so I myself don't believe any religion, just like, as a matter of their objective factual claims about the world, like, and I don't think that they're really reasonable. They're not epistemically reasonable. However, religion did serve psychological functions, like I say. So, and like, I don't really try to talk people out of Christianity because it appears that it's actually helping people, and like, it could be false and still be helping people. So like, most Christians that I know are nice people, and it actually seems like it's benefiting their life. So like, I'm not unhappy about this trend. And it's like, it's a better religion than wokeism, right? And I might have gotten this from McWhorter that, one of the ways Christianity is a better religion is it has forgiveness. So everybody's a sinner, but also everybody can be forgiven. And in wokeism, everybody's a sinner, but you cannot be forgiven, right? Or the white people are sinners anyway.
Yeah, the cis white male is the biggest sinner of them all, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
there you go. What I find really interesting about this space is, so I've got a couple of Polish friends, really, really, really good family friends. They're pretty conservative, but when I first met them, we basically had sort of the Christian conversation. They're like ardent atheists, which is absolutely fine. I'm basically an atheist myself, but they're really, really, really kind of anti belief forming mechanisms. They kind of adhere to coercion and all those sorts of things, like pretty strong. And I was chatting to them a few months ago, kind of about this sort of last couple of years, and they were saying, to their surprise, they're kind of almost in favour of wanting to support a belief system like Christianity as a defence mechanism against what's going on. So I do think there are loads of little bits like this kind of playing within society where even some of our sort of most strong advocates our most strong rejectors of Christianity are beginning to advocate for it now as a sort of flip. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So maybe the explanation is, there are these people who are sort of their interrationality, right? And interrationality in the sense of like they're explicitly trying to be rational, which doesn't necessarily mean you're always rational, but probably makes you more rational than the people who are not even trying. Okay, so but anyway, and then you look at sort of the belief systems around our society today, and maybe you decide, okay, Christianity is irrational, but it's not as irrational as this other thing, right? Now, it's kind of like maybe that's a tough contest. So I think some of the metaphysical beliefs of Christianity are very implausible, super implausible. And like wokeism doesn't have these kinds of supernatural claims. However, it is kind of like there's a way in which it's more irrational because it's like there's empirical evidence. You have to like pretend the empirical evidence doesn't exist. And with Christianity, it's more like they're just making untestable claims, they're saying there's this invisible being out there, which is irrational in the sense that there's no evidence for it, but there's also no conclusive evidence against it. So you don't have to like ignore what you're seeing, right? And yeah, so and like yeah, like you know, a lot of people today are like one of the big examples is you know, saying that men can be women. It's like to most people, it seems like that's really close to denying what you can see with your own eyes. Like saying a person who has a beard and a penis is a woman because they said that they are. That's really close to just like denying things right in front of your face, right? Now, by the way, I think that's oversimplified, but that is the way that people perceive it. So, you know.
Yeah, I really actually appreciated your chapter on the transgender question. I think you did a really fair job of exploring it from both sides and actually landing somewhere in the middle. It's like I don't want people to hear this and think that we're saying that you know that these things don't exist, but you did a really good job of kind of passing between the political boundaries, I think, and landing somewhere interestingly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
kind
So,
of go on, sorry.
yeah, so like you know, in my view, actually, it's not totally ridiculous that a person with a penis could be called a woman, right? But you know, the problem with it, most of the trans activists is that they're not telling you the argument. They're not telling you like the reason why that might make sense. Rather, they're trying to scold you. They're trying to like threaten you and intimidate you into saying that something that seems false is true.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some anxiety even about having this conversation and publishing it on my platform. I mean, I'm quite a small show, so the cancellation won't be that bad. But it's there's still that sort of fear, isn't there, even about having the conversation? But we'll get to that shortly because I want to ask you about publishing the book and the backlash potentially you've had for that. So we kind of talked about academia, we talked about religion a little bit. Just want to kind of really pass it and make sure that we're on the same page. Like, what other structural or kind of cultural factors do you think have sort of amplified the tendency of progressive myths to kind of sow division in the 21st century? Like, what else is going on under the scenes that we might not be aware of or might not be seeing clearly?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure. So, I mean, like, I think that the reason why progressivism sort of gained power to begin with, or I don't know, like the reason why this ideology about racism and sexism, whatever, became popular to begin with was that originally there just was a lot of racism and sexism. This goes back to like the 1960s, and then like a bunch of people, especially intellectuals in universities, you know, especially students, but also even professors were on board, started protesting. And so, okay, so we had the civil rights movement. But then what happened was that the movement won. Okay, but people didn't want to give it up. So if you admit that you won, then you have to stop the movement. But if this movement is providing this sense of meaning in your life and is providing a sense of community and direction and things like this that you need, and right, and also like maybe you have a need for identifying who the evil outgroup is. So there's this movement that's doing all these things for you. You don't want to end it. So you have to not admit that you won. So what you have to do is come up with new theories about why you haven't really won. New theories about how the society is really still racist and sexist. And maybe then you also come up with new forms of prejudice to start protesting against, right? And just sort of like expand it. And then, so we have some super smart people, you know, like the smartest people are usually kind of like the professors in universities. So we have all these people working for decades on figuring out how our society is still unjust. So, so they're going to come up with some stuff, right? And then like they're in control of education, so they're just going to be like teaching this to each new generation, right? And there's this kind of thing in the academic world where you're sort of like competing. It's very competitive, right? So like, you know, the new generation, they're taught this ideology, and then they like compete with each other to come up with ways of taking it further. Right? And this is a thing that happens particularly if you have ideological uniformity. If we had ideological diversity, then, you know, maybe people would just compete to come up with different points of view. But if there's almost total uniformity, then people are just going to compete to show their loyalty to the dominant ideology, and they do that by coming up with more extreme versions of it. Right? And that shows that you're even more committed. So you're an even better group member, right? Because people confuse loyalty to the group with loyalty to the ideology. And so, like that's part of what's been driving this whole ideological trend.
It's really interesting. I mean, you kind of look, and we're kind of potentially in the sort of fifth wave of feminism at the moment, and fourth wave kind of starting around 2010, fifth wave kind of around 2015 potentially. It's really hard to tell when these things officially start and end, but that's kind of what people tend to say, which is obviously these different waves trying to do different things. And if we look at someone like Martin Luther King in the 60s, saying we don't want to judge somebody by the colour of their skin, but rather by the content of their character. What's really interesting now is that you kind of look at where we've got to today, and we're being told that we are judging people by the colour of their skin, and it's a subconscious judgment. There's a judgment going on behind the scenes that we're not even aware of, which is making us, have to perform certain tasks as we're interviewing somebody to make sure we've got the right diversity, the right inclusion, the right equality. I think DEI stands for. I don't know, do you want to kind of touch on kind of how, I mean, it goes back to what you said before, right? It's about the absolute reversal, whereas Martin Luther King is all about kind of the content of someone's character, and today it's all about making sure that we have the right diversity within our candidates to make sure we're getting the right sort of people into the jobs to give the most, I don't know, diversity essentially, diversity for diversity's sake. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, so as I say, like I think wokeism had its origins ultimately in the civil rights movement, like whatever 60 years ago, however long. But the civil rights leaders of that time would not recognize the doctrines today, and it's gone very far. So like the current wokesters would be attacking Martin Luther King, like if he was alive today, they'd be attacking, because he was an integrationist. And he was in favor of colorblindness, right? He wanted people to be judged, as you say, by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And the wokeists today think that, oh, if you say we should be colorblind, then you're a racist. It's a racist to not take race into account. That's what they think. Okay, and also like some of them are segregationists, right? That is, they think that black people should separate themselves from white people. And the racists of the past thought that white people need to separate themselves from black people. It's really similar, right? It's it's like I was saying, it's reverse bigotry, right? But just as a side, well, maybe not a side point, as an important point, like, man, you know why the civil rights leaders oppose segregation? Because it's terrible for black people. Like, you want to segregate yourself from the majority of your society, the dominant society, then, I mean, you're just going to lose, right? You're going to be in these poor ghettos and things like that. Like, how is it going to go for a black person who, like, doesn't trust white doctors? How's that going to go? Because, like, most doctors are white. And, like, what if, like, you don't trust white cops and most of the cops are white? Okay. So then, if there's a crime in your neighborhood, you don't trust the cops, so you don't report it to them, or you don't tell them what happened, or you don't cooperate with them when they're trying to investigate. So how's that going to go? Well, there's going to be more crime, and there's going to be more poverty. It's just like, that's why segregation was bad. It was bad for the minorities. But so, okay. So what we should be doing is we should be trying to integrate. But this is not what the woke people want, because they just hate white people. And they can't believe that integrating with white people would actually be good for the minorities. Like they can't accept that, right?
If you want more ways to engage with the show, join our locals community. Membership is free and gives you access to all my updates, the reading plan, and early access to all audio-only versions of each episode. Supporters can ask guest questions, comment on posts, and get early access to all video versions of each episode. Your support is essential for the show's growth. The best way to support the show is through our locals community. You can also contribute via YouTube Super Thanks, PayPal, Substack, and even Bitcoin. All links are in the description, and thank you for helping us to continue to create content. It's really interesting. I want to talk about kind of the modern media and the sort of way that it's kind of created this sort of megaphone or this echo chamber or an environment for these ideas to kind of propagate. I think it's really, really hard these days to go to an article and to read it and to actually understand what side it's on. It's a really fascinating conundrum that we have. But I'd be interested in your position, Professor Huemer, around kind of how you think modern media, and we can go back to the 60s with newspapers and move on to radio and move on to TV and where we are today with the internet. Like how have these massive kind of factories of information been pushed towards us, and how has that made these myths be able to propagate so widely?
Yeah, I mean, so the free media business model goes back a ways. Okay, so it goes back to television and radio, and like on the face of it, it's weird that you can get TV shows and of most interest to us, like news shows, for free. Okay, well, there's a saying on the internet: if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. Right. So the business model is, it's not based on serving the interests or the desires of the consumers of the media. They're serving the advertisers because, okay, whoever is paying you, that's whom you're serving. Okay. And so what do the advertisers want? Well, they just want attention. Right. The whole business model is trying to capture people's attention so that then you can divert some of it towards the advertisers. So, okay. And then people will buy their product. Okay, and how do you capture attention? Well, it's not by giving the most fair and informative reports, right? People want to watch the news, but do they want the most fair and informative reports? Well, maybe they would say that they would, but that's not what matters. What matters is what actually captures their attention. So what actually captures their attention is like emotional stuff and stuff that plays to their prejudices. So like, you hear a story about how the other side, whatever side you're on, you hear about how the other side has done some outrageous thing. This is like a whole genre of news reports, right? And, back when Tucker Carlson was on Fox, he had a lot of stories of this kind. The other side has done something totally outrageous. And then, if you look up what actually happened, it wasn't really that. It's usually not as insane as it sounded, but that doesn't matter because people are not going to look it up because that requires time and effort. And okay, so anyway, and then you want people to be watching your thing, but also you want people to share it. And so the outrage is what causes them to share it with other people. Because people think, oh my God, this is horrible what the other side is doing. I have to tell everyone about it. And then you get more attention, and then the advertisers get more money. Okay, so that's the business model, but that was always the business model for television and radio. So you might wonder, well, how are things different now? But I think the internet has just dialed it up. Okay, because there's way more competition. With television, for a long time, there were just a few major news networks. There's ABC, NBC, and CBS. Okay, and then later Fox appeared. Okay, but that's still only 4 people, and they all tried to be kind of respectable, right? And people at the time, I think, didn't realize this because they didn't know what the contrast was. So people in the early days of Fox thought that Fox was off the rails, but we now know, no. Actually, you can go way further off the rails. So, okay, and with the internet, it's just everybody who has a computer and an internet connection can be a content provider. Okay, so there's a huge amount of competition for capturing attention. Whoever's better at it. And it's just if there's any lie, any story, true or false, that would capture attention, someone's going to provide that story. And then it'll just spread. So, yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah, it is worrying. And you kind of mentioned Fox and sort of Tucker Carlson, Sam Harris, who I think actually kind of recently recommended your Substack on his Substack, which is kind of cool. Just a shout out for you there. But anyway, so Sam Harris kind of talks about this idea that, or not this idea, the reality that Tucker Carlson was kind of shilling for Trump for a really, really, really long time. And then his kind of personal messages got exposed in some sort of case. Yes. I can't remember why. But it became very apparent that Tucker didn't like Trump in any way at all while he was shilling for him. It's crazy.
Yeah, this was the Dominion lawsuit, right? So
that's it, yeah.
Dominion voting system sued Fox for defamation because they were implying that the voting machines were corrupt or something. And then there are these texts from Tucker Carlson where it turned out that Tucker Carlson thought the same thing that I thought about Trump, which is that, like he's a master of destruction, he's a demonic force. Tucker said like he couldn't wait to stop talking about Trump. And there's like one text where he says something like, we all pretend that we have a lot to show for this, but come on, there's no upside to Trump. Okay, but then shockingly, this appeared to have no effect. This came out, and then like after that, Trump did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and you would not guess that anything had happened. And then after this, Tucker just keeps going on talking about like implying that Trump is good. And so I'm not sure if he actually says, I'm not sure he ever actually said that Trump was good or that he supported Trump, but he kind of makes it sound that way. So kind of shocking, like what you can do and just get away with it.
Yeah, I kind of feel like he obviously left Fox and he's now kind of publishing a lot of his content on YouTube, Rumble, and on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And it's been so interesting to kind of see in the last sort of probably 12 to 9 months, the sort of, I don't know, like the conversion almost of someone like Elon Musk or even Tucker coming back to being quite hard right. I'm aware that kind of a lot of the myths we talk about are progressive myths, but it's been fascinating kind of seeing the sort of rise of Trump term 2 and the individuals that kind of saw this coming and how they, I don't know whether they always wanted him to be in power. I highly doubt it, but they kind of, as they realize he's going to get into power, they all get in line and they all kind of follow the sort of pipe master of Trump and kind of all sing his praises. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, I don't quite know what's going on because to me, like I had a blog post which was one of my most popular blog posts about just like what's the problem with Trump, and to me the biggest problem is undermining democratic norms. Like it's like to me the biggest problem isn't he's a racist, and like a lot of the stuff that people were saying were just bullshit. Like he said white supremacists were very fine people. Factually, no, he did not. Actually, he explicitly denied that that's what he was saying at the time. Okay. Anyway, but the undermining democracy thing is real, but it's gotten less attention. And I'm not talking about like giving a speech on January 6th. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about he had an actual serious plan to not leave office after he left. Right? And that is not like anything anyone else has done. No one tried to actually stay in power after they lost the election. Okay, and if he had succeeded, and it's not crazy that he could have succeeded, right? And if he had succeeded, that's kind of the end of democracy. Like, that's kind of a big deal. I don't know if people just simply do not know, or they think it's okay. I don't know what's going on, right? And Elon Musk is not a stupid guy, so does he just not know about this? Like, I don't know. And, or is he just like, he's so pissed off by the woke people that he's just gonna go to whoever is opposing them.
I kind of feel like people like Musk think that America and the West, because I think we're all basically American, just due to the sort of power and the dominance that America has over the West and then the rest of the world. That America is kind of burning down under, or was burning down under the Biden administration, or you could say the Barack Obama term 3. And what we kind of find is that he's like, well, if it's already burning down, we might as well just burn it down and have our guys in power if we can. I mean, I'm kind of really, really worried about the end of Trump's second term. Like, do we begin to try and have a third term of Trump, but this time somebody in the spotlight? Like, it's a really worrying situation.
Yeah, well, so my optimistic hope is that, well, after Trump is gone, Trumpism is gone. And is that true? I don't know. It's not the case that all of the motivations behind him will be gone. Like, there'll still be populism, but he was really a unique character. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anyone who could get away with the stuff that Trump can get away with. And just like, and I don't know how, I don't know why. Like, I don't think there has ever been another politician who could have like 34 felony convictions and still overwhelmingly win the primary. And lose an election, then get convicted, and have multiple other trials ongoing at the time, and then overwhelmingly win the primary to get another shot. I don't think that's ever happened, and I'm thinking it won't happen again. Like when he's out, I think, the Trumpism is done, and yeah, I don't know, maybe J.D. Vance will run, but I just don't think that I don't think he's another Trump.
No,
So I don't think that he can do stuff like undermine democracy and get away with it.
no, no. It's fascinating. He's a really, really interesting character. I mean, I think history's going to look back on the last sort of. I think people always say this though in their sort of time and age. Like, history will look back on our time and go, "What happened?" But I think every time it's the same thing. Like crazy things happen consistently throughout the world. It's weird. I mean, we kind of spoken about January the 6th a little bit here and there, but it's just a sort of final point on that before we move on. It's really interesting hearing the two sides. Like one side tends to say, there were kind of riots at Capitol Hill, blah, 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 blah. And then you listen to sort of Ben Shapiro or Michael Knowles or these sort of, I think they're Daily Wire Plus guys. And it's sort of, it almost sounds as if there was a group of people who arrived to have a tour around and to see kind of the Capitol building and to understand what was going on. It's just, it's crazy how the two narratives are so different from this one event. Like, it's just incredible, really, how it can become so divided.
Yeah, I mean, like in that case, I just feel like the emphasis has been misplaced. Okay, like when people talk about January 6th, okay, it sounds like you're just talking about the thing that happened on that day, and out of context, it's not that big a deal, right? It's like, okay, so people broke into the Capitol building. So what? They had a riot. We've had riots before, so what? Okay, to me, like, no, it's only important because it was part of an overall plan to overturn the election results, right? Like, I don't know if people know that, like, Trump had this thing where he had, like, fake electors. He had fake electors meet and produce fake election certificates to pretend that he had won the states that he lost. And then he wanted Mike Pence to actually count the fake votes and declare him the winner. Right. And then, and then like, or at least Pence was supposed to say, well, there's no way of telling which are the correct election certificates. So we have to throw the election into the House of Representatives, right? Because nobody has a majority of electoral votes or something like that. And then the House would have been dominated by the Republicans. OK, so like it was a real plan for how he was going to stay in office. And the January 6th thing was just a part of that. It was just like, the role that it played, as far as I understand it, was to intimidate Mike Pence, right? And like to get Mike Pence to do what Trump wanted. And if Mike Pence had done what Trump wanted, there's no telling what would have happened. It's just like, by the skin of our teeth, we escaped that. I don't know what would have happened, but it would not have been good, right? Because like, there's no way that the Democrats can just sit there and accept that. Like, just like think about it from their point of view. They know that they won. And they know that the Republicans know that they won. Are they going to let the Republicans just take office anyway? Like, they cannot do that. So, and then there's this mob of people, and like, what are they going to do? Like, it looks like it's time for violence at that point. It looks like there's no choice. And at this point, like, I'm ranting for a while, but like at this point, like, it can't be ruled out that you have to start shooting people. Like, the guy is not going to leave. He lost the election, and he's not going to leave. And then he's got like these supporters who are like, breaking in to try to force you to back down. It looks like you have to like call up the cops, like you have to call up the army or something like that. Trump is the commander in chief at this time, though. So what is the military going to do? Are they going to follow his orders? Is there going to be a schism in the military where some people want to follow his orders and then some people want to support democracy? Right. And then like, some people say, oh, well, maybe the Supreme Court would resolve this. Would they? Like, they couldn't get off their ass to resolve some of these cases about Trump, before the election, right? They were just like delaying and delaying. And, like a majority are Republicans. So I'm not sure they wouldn't have voted with Trump if they took the case at all. Right. And this, like, you have to resolve it in a short time frame. And also, it can't be assumed at this point that Trump would actually obey their decision. He's not obeying the election results. Why would he obey the Supreme Court if they don't agree with him? He'll obey them if they agree with him, right? But then, it can't be assumed that the Supreme Court that they wouldn't act in their own self-interest. So they might be thinking to themselves, well, if we rule against Trump, we don't know what he's going to do. We don't think that he's going to obey us. So maybe he'll have us killed or whatever. Like, who knows what's going to happen? But, maybe the whole system will fall apart because the president will refuse to obey the Supreme Court. So maybe we have to rule in favor of him. Then it's just like complete chaos. Okay. We just can't have that. So anyway, like I got started on that rant. I don't know if I addressed our topic, but anyway.
No, I think it's really good. I mean, I think it's helpful for the listener or watcher to understand that we're not just saying kind of like, the left have got all the bad issues, it's the right as well. And I think just the sort of one final question I want to ask you on this, Professor Huemer, and it wasn't planned at all, and none of this section was around the recent election, kind of like, I couldn't imagine being an American in the recent election, because you kind of have these two options. You have kind of originally what was Biden, who then stepped down, and then you had Kamala Harris. But it's been very apparent that Biden has been mentally impaired for an extremely long time. So there has to have been a committee of individuals that Kamala might have been part of. I kind of joked about, the Barack Obama's third term, kind of pointing at that there is a group of Democrats who've been supporting Biden and assisting with his making of decisions. And you've got Kamala Harris, who's been involved with that, but isn't openly admitting to such, that there is this committee. So you got her as the presidential candidate that's going to, you could potentially vote for. But again, it's very hard to see how that committee would have vanished and disappeared. It would probably have been the same thing. And then you have Trump. And I just can't feel like it's right to have voted for either of these two parties. I don't know, is that a conundrum that lots of Americans feel, or is it just a very small minority?
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure. I think that the majority of people just sort of like don't really follow politics that much. So, don't really know what's going on. There's a bunch of Republicans who just think, oh, the Democrats are evil, whatever. And then they're probably kind of ignoring the bad stuff about Trump. And like Fox News is not reporting. Right? So I think they will only listen to right-wing news sources, which are not going to report on the worst stuff about Trump. They're just going to report on the bullshit. Right? So like they'll be reporting on the Stormy Daniels case because that case is bullshit. Right? They know that it's a bullshit case, so that's the only one they're going to cover. And then, there's something parallel on the left. About the committee, like, I don't think there was a committee. I don't know, because, like, I'm not in on it. I'm not in on the people in power, but I think it was more chaotic. People think that, the way society works is more organized than it really is. And, like, we have a tendency to always think that somebody's in charge. I think it was more like nobody's in charge. It's more like, so Biden is there, and then there's just probably like a random assortment of different people trying to influence him and trying to get their way. And like maybe one of them was Kamala Harris, but maybe sometimes she gets her way, and then maybe sometimes somebody else gets their way, and they just like try to get Joe Biden to sign whatever they want.
Fair play. I can't believe they haven't got you to be like party for this committee. You should be up there getting your views heard. Anyway,
I should be on the trilateral commission.
Yeah, push for it. So we've kind of spoken about this sort of the idea of distrust in institutions. There's also sort of distrust in sort of like the scientific kind of bodies that govern society as well. Very often you look at sort of COVID-19, the whole masks, should we wear masks, should we not wear masks, and the efficacy around that. It's been really interesting to kind of see the fallout of that. And then also we got media. So there's like, it feels like there's so much that we can't trust anymore. Like, how do we begin to know what to believe and where to go to actually find reputable sources? Because, I mean, most of us don't have enough time to be doing all the research and the digging that must be required to debunk the progressive myths like you have in this book. So how does the average Joe, the everyday person, begin to try and navigate the world?
Yeah, I mean, well, for the most part, you have to withhold judgment about most things because you just can't really figure it out because you don't have time, right? And also sometimes you just like, even if you had time, you couldn't figure it out because like you can't understand these academic articles, okay? But yeah, I would like it to be the case that we could trust academic experts, but we can't really trust them about politicized issues. Right? So like you usually should trust the experts about non-politicized issues, okay? And by that, I don't mean that the experts are almost always right. I just mean that they're better than you. Because we human beings get a lot of stuff wrong, and it's probably going to turn out that a lot of our current scientific theories are wrong, but they're still going to be better than what you would think if you don't listen to them, right? They're going to be closer to the truth, right, than just what a layperson would think. Okay. However, there are certain issues that became politicized where the people who write about them, including like scientists, are thinking too much about the political implications, and they're worrying about whether something they say might support the wrong side. And as soon as they start worrying about that, that means you cannot trust what they say, because what they say is not solely motivated by trying to describe reality. It's also motivated by their political goals, right? And you don't know, and they're not experts on politics, right? Like scientists aren't expert on which is the better political ideology or whatever. Okay, so like this happened with global warming. Like there are cases where, it's like scientists will be worrying about, oh, well, if we publish something that's a little bit skeptical of global warming, will it be seized upon by the global warming skeptics? And then that will undermine the effort to try to reduce global warming or something like that. Okay. And then, there's stuff like this about gender and race. Like people just don't want to publish on those subjects because what if they have results that could be used by right-wing people? Right. Okay. So anyway, oh yeah. Okay. So I didn't answer your question though, because your question was like, well, how could we form beliefs better? Or like, what do we do? Basically, I think there are some sources that could be trusted. And like in the book, there's a point where I start talking about signs of reliability. So reliable sources, like for example, reliable sources frequently qualify their claims. So instead of saying that something is definitely always true, they will say something is usually true, probably true, or something like that. Reliable sources, they will frequently give arguments for their thing. They won't just assert it, and the arguments will like try to appeal to things that people who don't already agree with their ideology could see to be evidence, right? Rather than just like, arguing for one ideological claim based upon other ideological claims. Okay. Reliable sources will frequently address objections or alternative viewpoints. Okay, so like I'm arguing for something, and then at some point, maybe I will talk about what are the reasons for doubting the thing that I'm saying, and then try to address those reasons. And if I never address reasons for doubting what I'm saying, that means maybe I don't know about the reasons for doubting it, in which case I'm probably not very reliable. Or I do know, but I don't want to tell you about it, in which case I'm also probably not very reliable. Or I know about it and I don't have anything to say about it, right? In which case I'm not very reliable. Okay. And this thing of, you have to address objections or address the alternative viewpoint. This is a thing that you're supposed to do in philosophy. Like this is part of, philosophical training and maybe academic training more generally. It's not a thing that political ideologues generally do. So that, you will not hear either the Fox News or like, what's a big left-wing source? I don't know. The Young Turk, maybe, I don't know. You will not hear them addressing a lot of objections, right? Or they might address only the dumbest opponents, right? So if you're only addressing the dumbest and most whatever, obviously ideologically extreme opponents, then that's not very reliable either. Okay, but so if you find people who are sort of like they're doing the good things, they're addressing what appear to be intelligent objections, they're giving non-question begging reasons for their view, they're having at least somewhat qualified, nuanced positions, then you should spend more time listening to those people.
It's interesting as well, because I think very often we kind of have our news feeds buzzing with content that is almost like completely missing any meaningfulness or applicability to our lives. It's almost like they're sub messages or sub conversations or sub stories that are kind of interesting to kind of flit through and talk about with friends or whatever, but actually the effect and the fallout that they're going to have on your life is minimal. It's really interesting and hard sometimes to actually kind of find somewhere where you're going to actually be able to engage with stuff. I mean, I kind of guess this is why I like things like Substack. You can get some really interesting people talking about very nuanced things that you might enjoy to read. But again, there's no news Substack where you're going to get proper insight into specific things. It's just a tricky one that we all need to try and navigate, especially in the 21st century. It's one that we need to overcome, essentially. I wanted to ask around the idea, I guess, of activism being a driver for progressive myths. And I want to frame it or ask the question like, is is it like a Ponzi scheme where individuals kind of get pulled into this story because they've been kind of almost like marched into it, like a sort of sergeant would be kind of rounding up people to go fight for a war and say World War I, World War II or whatever. They're doing these sort of recruitment drives before they have to force people to fight. Like you had these like recruiters almost, these activists who are trying to get individuals to kind of flip and then join their cause. And then those people have to be almost radicalized and become activists to be able to then almost legitimize the reasons that they're involved. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, well, so you asked if it was like a Ponzi scheme, and
Yeah.
I guess I don't see that because so the thing about a Ponzi scheme is that in order to sustain it, you have to grow, you have to keep growing the base, right? And so I don't see that structure going on. But yeah, there's definitely this thing of the current progressives trying to recruit the new generation, and it happens that like the younger people, they're particularly apt targets, right, for recruitment. But by the way, this is why Christian evangelists like to show up on college campuses and they just like preach all day loudly, okay, because there are a bunch of young people who their belief system is not yet set, right? And so like, and it's going to become set, like the brain is still developing literally physically. But then it is going to stop developing, and then people are going to become ossified. So you need to get them before that happens. So you try to get them when they're in college and they're more open-minded. Okay, and as I say again, like people have this need they have a need for a sense of meaning, a sense of what their place is in the universe, and whatever it is, you just need to know what it is. You just need to know what your place is. Okay, if your place is to be a dishwasher, you need to know that. That's better than not knowing, even if it's not a great place. So so they're on the lookout. Like the young people are on the lookout for a belief system that will tell them their place in the world and like tell them the meaning of things, and how they're supposed to evaluate stuff that is happening, and also like they want to join a community of people who share that belief system. Okay, so like that's why the young people are susceptible to being recruited by religions or ideologies. And it just happens that, well, a bunch of young people are going to college, which is run by professors, and a bunch of professors have a particular ideological orientation, so they're just going to induct people into their ideology. So, like that. That's how this thing just keeps propagating itself. I don't think it's going to last forever, though, because, like, there's like that, I don't know how, but somehow ideologies eventually go out of fashion.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of seeing a big cheer on the right these days, especially now Trump's back in power, around this idea that kind of now DEI or whatever it is going to be kind of defeated, destroyed, removed, crushed. But the idea of that taking place is, I find, to be a little bit kind of false, because the idea that kind of policy or governmental decree is going to stop something from being able to exist and propagate. I mean, governments do some things, but they're very, very poor at actually being able to stop kind of movements from taking place. There tends to be the movement itself burns out, or it begins to lose momentum as individuals waken up. And I feel like just trying to do so forcefully is potentially going to cause things to grow. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that space?
I'm not sure. So I think wokeism might have grown as a result of Trump's 2016 victory, because it was just like this reaction against him. Like, the woke leftists were all like, you see everything we've been saying about how bad America is true, and now we need to mobilize, whatever. I'm not sure it will go the same way this time. The government does have a big influence on society. So, like the way I see it, the left has control of most of the institutions of our society, except the government. And they have control of the bureaucracy mostly, but around half of elected offices are controlled by Republicans. And that's not insignificant. Like that's actually a lot. So in like a bunch of university administrators are they're acting like they support woke ideology, but what they really support is themselves. What they really care about is their own self-interest in maintaining their own positions of power and continuing to get paid and whatever. So if it looks like the tides have turned, like they will flip. If it looks like the powerful are against that ideology, then they will turn against it. It's just and then, and then the average professors are not going to turn against it because like they've been left wing for a long time, right? But the administrators really make a big difference.
That's fair. I mean, I'm probably looking at it through my British lens. We've had a lot of very kind of wet politicians over the last 15 years or so that have done very little to help us. So that's potentially where I'm coming from there.
Oh yeah, so like, I have this example like around 2012, the Obama administration, their Department of Education sent out this famous letter, the Dear Colleague letter, to universities across the country that was basically saying that when you have accusations of sexual harassment, you have to use a lower standard of proof. So there's some people had been using this whatever clear and convincing evidence standard or the proof beyond a reasonable doubt standard, and the Department of Education said no, you have to use the preponderance of evidence standard, which basically just means like it's a lot easier to find somebody responsible for sexual harassment in a university, than it used to be, and so that like sort of changed the culture. Just changed things around university. And then suddenly there was like this big focus on sexual harassment and like all these accusations. And that was an early part of the Me Too movement. Like as far as like the way I perceived it was that was the beginning of the Me Too movement.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, in your book, you go into a really nice section where you dive into kind of the fallout of that and how it's taken place, and even the sort of surveys that people get sent to online now, and then the crazy statistics that people then say on Fox News or wherever about the numbers of female students that are getting raped. And actually, when you begin to look at the data and crunch it, you can see that they're just doing faulty mathematics. They just haven't got it correct. It's crazy, really.
Yeah. There's a story, but there's this thing that you keep hearing about how a quarter of women get raped in college. That's super alarming. Right, but just like on the face of it, that implies that American college campuses are 10 times more dangerous to women than Detroit, which is the most crime-ridden city in America. So just on the face of it, you should be a little bit skeptical. Right? Let's just start with that, right? But anyway, there's more discussion of that in the book.
Yeah, it's well worth picking up. I want to briefly talk about economic factors. I mean, so we're recording this late January 2025. It's going to be out in a couple of months' time. So currently the sort of LA fires are kind of in the news and being quite a big thing, and it's kind of quite interesting to kind of be nowhere associated with them over here in West Yorkshire in England. But it's been interesting kind of seeing the different sort of economic factors where the rich are kind of almost trying to say, well, the fire departments and put the proper preventions in, blah, 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 blah. And then the sort of other classes of people who are trying to say, well, the rich have a right to, there is a need for the rich to part with some of their money if they want to support LA, for instance, and kind of help it continue on. Again, Sam Harris has done a few pieces on this as well on his Substack recently. We can take LA as our example, but I'd be interested to kind of talk about economic and class dynamics. Like, how do economic factors such as like wealth inequality or those sorts of things intersect with and fuel the adoption of progressive myths? Like, is it something that is driving these things forwards?
Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, not really. But so, you mentioned the LA fires, which tempts me to start commenting about that. And I know little about it, okay, but I used to live in California. And I remember that there were fires periodically when I was growing up, but there was nothing nearly as bad as what they have now. Like, there was never a time when there was like a fire going for more than a week or whatever, and like they couldn't get it out. And it just seems like the fires are more frequent and certainly bigger and more dangerous. So I know nothing about this, like, professionally. Like, I don't know how to fight fires. I don't know how to prevent fires. But it looks to me like the government is failing. It's like, even though I don't know anything about it, I believe there are people who do, and there must be a way of doing it better because it wasn't always like this. So it must be that they're failing. Something about forest management. You got to do something to try to prevent the fires ahead of time. I don't know. Okay. Anyway. And then, okay, you asked about whether wealth inequality had something to do with the progressive myths, and so I suspect not really. So like the people on the left would like to say, like, they would like it to be the case that their ideology is the ideology of the oppressed, but I don't think it is. I think their ideology is the ideology of the effete intellectual class, like, who are mostly like upper and upper middle class. Educated, mostly white, liberals. Okay, or they're not liberal anymore, but anyway, they used to call themselves liberals. So like I don't think that I don't think that minorities are that much into this. Actually, maybe women are. Women are more likely to be into wokeism. But like you saw that in the last election, even though the majority of blacks and Latinos still voted Democrat, it was less extreme than had been previously. So it's actually like racial minorities are moving towards the Republicans. They move towards Trump, even though he's like the opposite of what the people on the left say those people should support, right? So, and like some of it is like the stuff about transgenderism. I think that played a role in the election. Like, no, actually, poor people are not into the transgender thing. They're not into that ideology, and like, a lot of them are socially conservative. A lot of them are Christian. A lot of the Hispanics are Christians, like even Catholics. Okay, which is hardcore Christian. So, and I don't think that. So, okay, like the progressives would like to have. They sort of stoke class conflict. They would like to stoke class conflict and racial conflict and all that. But actually, Americans are not that into that. Wokeists are into that, but like I don't think that poor people in America. I don't think they're on board with Marxism or whatever, or socialism or any of this stuff, right? And whatever, like they know that they're poor, right? But I don't think that they think America is a terrible oppressive society. So, yeah.
You've kind of emphasized the importance of skepticism towards ideological claims. I think it'd be good now to chat through some of the philosophical principles that could kind of underpin or assist an approach like this. And then once we've looked at those, maybe we can answer the question kind of why these principles are so often ignored when it comes to progressive myths.
Yeah. Well, so now I feel confused about what principles we're talking about.
So I guess kind of what would it be that you would kind of want to deploy to enable yourself to be skeptical towards you could pick any progressive myth that you want to and dive into it, but there are sort of certain things like your level of credence towards facts. You already mentioned that kind of you should be kind of holding back the reality that you don't know very much because you don't have time to do your own research. Yes. Those sorts of kind of philosophical kind of principles that would help somebody to be able to kind of, I guess, navigate their sort of worldview and then push back against or criticize these progressive myths.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I guess like there's a thing to know about ourselves. Thing that you should know about yourself. Like people have a natural tendency to accept testimony, so to speak. Right? You have a natural tendency to say what's on your mind. Which obviously could be overcome if you're afraid of the consequences or whatever. But anyway, if there's no particular reason for being afraid, people have a tendency to just say something because they think it. But also, you have a tendency to just believe something because somebody said it. These kind of go together, and this probably evolved because, like, if you're a child and you don't believe adults, you're going to have a bad time. Like, you come into the world knowing nothing, and the adults around you know things. You have to listen to them, and the children who didn't listen to them probably like got run over by cars and things like that. So, or run over by saber-toothed tigers, as the case may be. Okay, so there's probably like almost an instinct for listening to other people, but unfortunately, this doesn't work out so well with political information. And so, like, you have to sort of like take account of what kind of information you're consuming. I heard this comment from David Friedman, the economist. So, he commented one time that if you hear some story on the internet and the story is like so catchy that it would have propagated even if it wasn't true, then it's probably not true. So just sort of like think about the explanations for this story coming to you. And if a good explanation of the story is just like it appeals, like even if it was false, it would have been spread because it appeals to people's prejudices. You should assume that's probably what happened unless you have independent corroboration, right? Related fact is like reality is not tailored to you. Like the world doesn't care about your desires It doesn't care about your prejudices or hopes and fears and whatever. It just doesn't care about you. And so the facts in general are not going to be a close match to what you want to believe. They're not going to be a close match to what stimulates a particular emotion in you. The facts are typically like just randomly related. They're just unrelated to your beliefs and desires. Okay, so if you hear a bunch of stories that are just like fitting what you want to believe or what you would, whatever, fitting your biases really closely, you should assume that they were curated by people in a way that was not attending closely to reality, right? Like the best explanation is that somebody deliberately designed this story, ignoring reality, to fit what you want to hear, right?
If you're looking for more ways to enjoy our content, check out the YouTube channel for full-length videos or explore our Rumble channel for an alternative video platform. You can also listen to the podcast in your favourite feed, and while you're there, please leave a positive and written review. It helps others to find the show. Lastly, you can read all my essays over on Substack, and by signing up, each new instalment will be delivered straight to your inbox. All links are in the description, and thank you for following along. Yeah, just being really, really honest as well, like an example of this that's affected me in my own journey, kind of out of Christianity. It's been like a sort of 6, 7 year, 8 year now journey was, as I was kind of beginning to leave Christianity, I wanted more and more to believe in ID, which stands for intellectual design or intelligent design. So I was reading books like by people like Professor John Lennox, who's like a really well-known and well-respected mathematician here in the UK. He's Irish. Really, really interesting guy, like really, really good fun as well. And he's written a couple of books that kind of defending this idea of intelligent design. So I was reading these and kind of they're coherent, they make sense, they're kind of vaguely logical in how they're presented, but actually they're kind of given to you without giving you the extra detail that would be really, really helpful to understand where the gaps are. They're kind of almost like putting a veneer over it, or say it's a plasterer pasting their plaster over the board. You're missing out all the cracks because they're just glossing over very, very key, very, very important facts. So it took me a lot of work to go away and read, like Richard Dawkins and even Darwin and others to begin to understand what evolution actually is as a mechanism, as a fact, and how we can begin to understand it and then challenge those idea assumptions that were just planted in my head from reading these very well written and fairly rigorous books. They're using a lot of facts, a lot of statistics. And it's just so easy to get sucked in. I think that's my big concern with all of this.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so that brings up that when you read something or you listen to someone, it's good to know what their perspective is at the beginning. Like this person's orientation is like maybe that they're a Christian, and so everything that they say is going to be to try to support that. It's good to know that, because you gotta, you might have to sort of discount what they're saying a little bit, or just assume that they're not telling you the whole story, and you might have to get the rest of the story from someone else. And now, as I was suggesting earlier, there are certain signs of somebody being reliable. So, like if the person is never considering objections, right? Or if the objections sound dumb, right? But that there are smart people on the other side, then maybe this guy's not that trustworthy, right? Like what you're supposed to, as a philosopher or as an academic, you are supposed to consider the strongest objections that you can think of, right? And so, look for somebody who's doing that kind of. Okay? And by the way, on the subject of intelligent design, I don't think that's a silly theory. I think that's a reasonable possibility that the universe had an intelligent designer. I don't think that Christianity is at all plausible. If there was an intelligent designer, he's not doing the stuff that's in the Bible, right?
Yeah, I find, so I just being really, really honest about this as well, is that, kind of left theism became very, very atheistic, and kind of find myself landing more and more. I'm not a deist, I'm basically an atheist, but kind of I could understand where somebody could be a deist, believe that there was something that started this off and then basically fucked off somewhere, and this entire thing's been running since. Like that makes sense to me. The idea of a sort of a designer that's there making changes as things moves along doesn't. But that's not what you said. And I think kind of Hume, after speaking to Eric Wielenberg, who's a really interesting philosopher of religion,
Yeah.
I think Hume could very well have been a deist as well, from what I can tell, and obviously had a lot of arguments against theism. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And by the way, one of my other books, Knowledge, Reality, and Value, talks about the fine-tuning argument and possibility that there was a designer. Um, you know, people should read that too.
They should.
And
They should.
oh yeah, so like biggest problem with theism is the problem of evil. And I think the strongest argument for some kind of intelligent design is the fine-tuning argument. Right? Okay, probably don't have time to go into those, but if the creator was not an all-powerful being but merely very powerful, then it makes sense that there could still be evil. And when you consider sort of the vastness of the universe, it makes sense. There's something like 10 to the 22 stars, which is incomprehensibly large. And so, like, if there was a creator, like, he cannot be going around unless if he's not really all powerful. He's just very powerful, but not all powerful. He can't be fixing everything on 10 to the 22 different star systems.
No. Also, he's going to want some downtime. Like, he's going to want to be able to watch The Simpsons and have a few beers. I've got to give him some leeway here, people.
Yeah. Maybe he's out creating other universes,
That's it, yeah. Creating better universes than this one because he's learned from his mistakes.
This was just a practice universe. This is like the prototype.
Yeah. Like a really, really, really shit pottery that your children bring back to you from the bin, like at school, like a pottery day. Like, look, I made a cup and it doesn't actually hold water. You're like, good job.
Yeah. You got to be encouraging to God.
Yeah. You're doing great.
Good try,
Keep it
God.
up.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Let's continue. I've still got a host of questions that I'd love to dive in with you today. So I want to talk about truth and ideological defense systems. I mean, you do discuss the idea that kind of ideologies create defensive systems or defense systems against their opposing views. So how do you think these systems emerge within an ideology, and how do you begin to dismantle it or even see that you do have a defense system? We could potentially go back to the idea of kind of Christianity here and ID if we wanted to, but it'd be interesting to kind of hear progressive myth, somebody's in it, they have defenses. How do they even begin to recognize that there are defenses, and how do they dismantle those defenses?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, like, why are there defense mechanisms? And the answer to that is maybe some kind of evolutionary process, right? So, yeah, so like your body has defenses against diseases and things like that. Why? Because people who didn't have defenses died in the past. Okay, so like belief systems that are unable to defend themselves will die out. So the ones that we have today have defense mechanisms. And these defense mechanisms are they're other beliefs or maybe attitudes that make it hard for somebody to undermine your belief system, right? Beliefs that when you incorporate them into your belief system, they cause you to disregard apparent counter evidence, right? Okay, so they could be like with religion, there are things like, well, the devil is trying to tempt you to lose your soul because he wants your soul in hell. So if you believe that, you better not listen to any atheists, right? So don't listen to any arguments against Christianity. Okay, so like that's a defense mechanism for the Christian belief system, right? And contemporary wokeists and progressives have similar beliefs, right? Not that it's the devil, but that basically that it's immoral to question their belief system, right? So like if somebody questions the truth of progressive beliefs, that person is a racist, which is the worst thing that you can do. They're immoral, right? And it's key that there's a difference between saying somebody's mistaken and saying that somebody is immoral. And the saying that somebody's immoral, that is supposed to make you disregard what they say without evaluating its evidential merits. Okay, so like that's particularly effective, and you particularly need that if your belief system is in fact false. If you have a false belief system, you can't defend it merely by saying that it's true and like, oh, let's look at the evidence. You have to say, don't look at the evidence. And how are you going to convince people to not look at the evidence? You have to convince them that it's immoral to look at the evidence or something like that. Like it could be harmful, right? And okay, so that's why we have to suppress, like, if people are posting wrong think on Twitter or whatever, we have to like shout them down. we have to stop speakers from coming to campus if they are questioning woke beliefs and things like that. Okay. All right. Now, how would somebody recognize that they have these belief system defense mechanisms? Well, probably just by hearing me give that description and then thinking about it. Like, there's this belief that you have in your belief system. What is it doing? Like, is it making it impossible for you to revise your belief system even if it was false? Just think about that. Right? Like, what if, just hypothetically, what if you were wrong? Is there a way that you would come to realize that? And like, if you've adopted practices and attitudes that would prevent that from happening, then you should realize you've probably been gripped by a mind virus, as some people call it, right?
Yeah, I really like the idea of, or find it funny when I hear people say terms like mind virus, woke mind virus. It's always great. Makes the conversation really like wholesome and full, and not just like making everybody really polarized.
Yeah. Well, so like some people objected to the mind virus metaphor. I guess they're like, it's not a virus. Yes, it's not a virus. Okay, that's a metaphor. But it is an interesting metaphor, right? So, like the viruses, physical viruses take over the mechanism of your cells to reproduce themselves and pass them on. Okay. Now, the mind viruses do the same thing, but they do attempt to replicate. Like, they use your mind to try to make copies of themselves, like to try to get you to spread them to other minds, right? So, like, it's common that part of a belief system will be that it's morally good or possibly even obligatory to spread this very belief system. And like that's a distinctive, interesting kind of belief, right? Why is that common? Well, like, there's an evolutionary explanation of why that's common, right? Because if you have that in your belief system, then it causes you to spread the belief. So that's why there's a lot of people who have belief systems with that element in them, right? And like, it's immoral to oppose this belief system. Okay, why is that in there, right? There's an evolutionary explanation of that too, right? It's not exactly like a virus, but there is evolutionary logic, to explaining how belief systems spread that carries over from biology.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. I think my reference is more like when you're on Twitter or X or whatever, and you see somebody just saying you've got a woke mind virus, and that's all they comment. It's like, this isn't helpful. But what you just said really is. I think talking about kind of evolution, genetics, Richard Dawkins, and the idea of memes, I think are really, really powerful. And I kind of feel like that plays into this idea of kind of memes propagating throughout societies, and that's kind of trying to grapple with new and emerging kind of potentially fresh memes. I don't know. Would you kind of class progressive myths as potentially memetic? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, the original use of meme by Richard Dawkins was, it's just like, I don't know, an element of culture or something that some cultural or intellectual thing that could be propagated. So so each of the myths is a meme in his original sense, right? Not in the sense of a picture with a caption on it, a funny caption. And then you could like analyze their evolutionarily relevant characteristics. Like, how good is this thing at propagating? And then, one of the big things is, so it depends upon the environment that you're in, which is also true of genes. Like, a gene isn't just unconditionally good or adaptive. Like, it depends upon the rest of the genes that are around it, and also what's going on with the other organisms and the rest of the natural environment. Okay, so anyway, like, there's a meme like, there's like the Michael Brown story. Okay, so Michael Brown was this black guy who was killed by a white police officer. And then protesters were going around, doing this like gesture, like hands up, don't shoot. Okay, which refers to supposedly Michael Brown surrendered before being gunned down by this racist white cop. Okay. And that's not what happened, right? Like, as a factual matter, the FBI investigated and concluded that actually, no, Michael Brown was like attacking the cop. Okay. But anyway, the hands up, don't shoot thing still spreads. Okay, so that's like a meme. And why does that spread? Because there are a lot of people that resonates with. Like, there are a lot of people who want to believe that there's a bunch of racist white cops. Or it's just like when they hear that, they feel outraged, and then they feel like they have to spread that information, right? Because it's such an outrageous thing. Like, we have to make sure that everyone knows this so that they can fight against it, so they can stop it. Okay, so like that thing propagates even though it's not factually true. Right? Just sort of illustrating that. Well, there's like the reproducibility of an idea versus the accuracy of an idea. Those could totally come apart.
Yeah, and I feel like as humans, we're obviously emotional creatures, and we have knee-jerk instinctive reactions to issues of injustice, and then we can easily begin to then portray them as systemic. I mean, in your book, you obviously cover Michael Brown, but also you cover loads and loads of other progressive myths, as the title says. But what's interesting about them is you give different quotes from famous people who've kind of heard something, given their opinion on it, whether it's in a newspaper, on air, or on radio, and then that's all they've really ever done about it. But it's really interesting seeing how many people would say something like, the Michael Brown situation is blah, 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 like condemning what the cops did without allowing the FBI investigation to take place and then commenting once they have the facts. And I think this sort of dives into the sort of cultural element where we've got individuals who are saying things because they just want to be saying the right thing, and also the reality that there are systemic injustice issues. I mean, last time you were on the show, we both spoke about veganism and ethics for 2 hours or something. It was a great conversation. It'll be linked in the description. It'd be interesting to kind of hear, like, do you think that these progressive myths are sucking up all the oxygen and stopping us as a society from focusing on actual systemic injustices?
Yeah, good question. And the answer is clearly yes, right? So, you mentioned our previous discussion about veganism, and it's like, if you want to talk about oppression, like how about being kept in a tiny cage for your entire life and then being chopped into pieces so that other people can eat you? Like, that seems pretty oppressive. Like, that is way worse than somebody using the wrong word to refer to you. Like, I would rather have somebody misgender me 1,000,000 times than live in a factory farm. Okay, so, and, okay, well, you might think, oh, don't worry, we can attend to both of these. We can address both problems. Yeah, but, it's like one of these is getting so much attention, it just seems like maybe it's taking time away, right? Like there are all of these activists who, they've got a finite amount of time and energy, right? And it seems like they're directing it to much smaller problems when they could be directing it to this much huger problem. That's not the only one. Like, and like if you're concerned about the plight of black people in America, and fair enough, like black people are doing worse than the average American, so like maybe we should be attending to that and trying to do something about it. But what's the even if you're focusing on just that issue, like what is the best way of focusing on it? Is it to have white people sit around and talk about how bad they are, or like is it to give people sensitivity training, or like have people use the right words and the right language or something? Is it having people post black squares on their Twitter account? Like, is that going to help black people? Like, that doesn't seem like that is the best, like, no, we need to do something that's more tangible. Like, we would have to like go to the schools in the black neighborhood, maybe like, maybe we could have, and like, I don't know what should be done, but this is just like the kind of thing you might think like, oh, maybe we need more security in the inner city schools so that like the kids could be safe, right? So like maybe they could do better in school if they were physically safe, right? Or you might think maybe we should have school choice. Like we need to improve the quality of schools. Maybe we could do that by having more competition. So maybe we could do that if the parents could like take the money that's being spent on their kids and like take it to another school. And then, okay, quality improves, and then maybe education improves. So like, I don't know if those are the things to do, but those are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about. Not thinking about like, white liberals in the suburbs having meetings to feel their whiteness and stretch out of their white privilege or whatever, right? Yeah, and so it just seems like a lot of the stuff that the woke people are doing is distracting from better things that you could do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, a lot of the progressive myths that we see have their fingers on an actual issue, but have gone down extremely bizarre tangents and rabbit holes trying to kind of almost not make it into more than it is, but to derail it into something entirely different. Like racism is a thing, and sure, it was much worse. Look at the 1800s, and look at the 1960s and the progressive movements that began to take place there, and then kind of where we are today. We're a far cry away from where we have been. There's obviously more that we can always do to improve the situation, but we're so busy kind of, having to identify our whiteness, whatever it is, blah, 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 that we're not actually able to deal with actual racism, we're always coming back to this sort of meta racism. It's essentially like progressive myths are trying to create meta issues out of primary issues, and the primary issues then get neglected and forgotten about, and we're so caught up letting all the oxygen get sucked up by the fires of these meta issues. It's a real shame, in honesty. We could be so much further along and progressive than we are because of the progressive myths. It's a bizarre, like, tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, and yeah, you might say like, okay, so progressivism is about progress. They want progress, and they say that they want racial equality, right? But the things that they're doing are not promoting progress. Okay, so like if you suppress dissent, which is like a big part of what the woke progressives are doing, like suppressing dissent does not lead to progress. That's never been the case in history. Like suppressing dissent prevents progress. Okay, and then we want to end racism. Well, the way to do that is not to make everyone super race conscious and like constantly talk about their race. They're like, I think the progressives might be the biggest source of racism today, right? And like if you want to help minorities, like I really don't think that racism is like in the top 10 problems, right? So like low quality schools, that's a big problem for minorities in America. It's not really racism. It's not like the teachers hate black people, not even implicitly. It's not like they unconsciously hate the black people, whatever. No, it's like more tangible problems. Like the school's falling apart. There's violence in the school. Like the kids are not coming to school. There's too many drugs. There's too many gangs, whatever. Like it's tangible things like that, not like the unconscious attitudes or something.
Yeah, tangible things we can actually do something about, and we aren't because we're so busy doing other things. It's frustrating. I mentioned right at the start that I wanted to touch on the sort of risks and consequences for speaking up about something like this. Like what are the personal and professional risks that you take or an individual might take for kind of challenging these myths, Professor Huemer?
So I'm not sure really. I mean, like I know that some people are going to hate me, or some people already hate me, and there are probably people having mean tweets about me on the internet, but I don't read them, so I just don't read the mean tweets. And luckily, I have tenure at the universities, so they officially can't fire me for having politically incorrect views. If I didn't have tenure, then I would assume that I could be fired for that. Now, that doesn't mean that they literally can't fire me for my political views. It means that if they were to do so, I would have a great lawsuit. That's what it means. Okay, but it would take a lot of time and money to get the lawsuit to go through. So it's not really right. So it's still a deterrent, right? Like the fact that the woke mob has power in academia is still a deterrent for people to speak out. And like there are plenty of academics who are keeping their mouth shut and don't want to touch controversial issues, even if they have tenure, because they know that even though like the law is on their side, they could still have a lot of trouble, right? And besides that, there's also sort of like, informal sanctions, like people just not like you, right? Now, luckily, philosophy is a lot better than most other fields, right? So like you're a lot more likely to find a philosopher who will like whatever take unpopular views than a sociologist, I think, or whatever, a professor of ethnic studies or something like that. And so that, the other philosophers have been reasonably friendly to me. Like, nobody's particularly attacking me. And like, frankly, if people don't like me, it's probably for other reasons. It's probably because I'm annoying or something. Right. Oh, but although I don't really know, because, there could be like, there could be sort of like really informal things that you would never know about. Like you didn't get invited to something because somebody doesn't like your political views, and they would never tell you that, and you'll never find out, right? So, or it could be like your paper gets rejected from a journal, and they're not going to say because it has the wrong political orientation, but that could happen. It could be because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened before, right, with papers on climate change, both for and against. The various journals have said no to them because of the political leanings, or the political leanings about the climate leanings, which I just get so meta is frustrating.
Yeah. I have a few examples in the book. There's like this example where somebody did a study of what happens with female mentors in science, right? So they looked at women scientists who had women mentors, and then women scientists who had male mentors. And then the study indicated that the ones with the male mentors did better. Okay, now, and then, there's some question about, okay, the way that they determined if you had a mentor was whether somebody co-authored, a senior person co-authored a paper with you. Okay, maybe that's not really mentorship. I don't know. But anyway, and then, they looked at I think they looked at your citation counts subsequently or something like that. Okay, so whether you could kind of question whether that really indicates that. Anyway, that paper, there's nothing wrong with the numbers in it. There are questions about whether that's really a measure of mentorship or whatever. Okay, but that paper got retracted. The reason it got retracted was basically political. A bunch of people got upset because they said, you're undermining female scientists who want to mentor someone. Right? So by publishing this, we're going to make fewer people want to go to these female scientists as mentors. So the objection is political. That's exactly the kind of objection that should not count in science. Because the first thing we need is the truth. We need to know the facts. Okay. So anyway, just stuff like that goes on. And so that's part of why we can't trust science about politically charged subjects.
I think the problem is that these days most subjects are becoming politically charged. It just feels like the bucket list of subjects that aren't politically charged are getting less and less and less as time goes by. I wanted to ask you about sort of how we can, or how society can try and protect intellectual dissenters. I'm sure there's a certain place on Twitter or Facebook where if I post this video, it'd get a lot of hate. There'll be other places on Twitter and Facebook where it get a lot of love. I think it's very obvious that kind of people either want to have their viewpoints reinforced, or they're happy for people to have honest, open dialogues and to try and explore the landscape, very much as we've been doing today. But the challenge is that if I was to stand up and work and say something to challenge the sort of kind of classic gender stories, or to challenge whatever else is going on at the moment within society and politics, there's a chance that I could be labelled as a disturber of the peace, for instance, and then kind of have that little mark against my name for the rest of my time that I'm employed with that company. How can people have the confidence to intellectually dissent within society? It feels like we're always vying for our jobs, our welfare, our family, and also our kind of views and opinions upon these subjects. It's a really hard balance, I think, right now.
Yeah. So Americans are lucky that we have the First Amendment. And sadly, you don't have the First Amendment. But in the academic world, we have a notion of academic freedom, and it's supposed to be protected by tenure. But I think that this is not a very good protection. I think tenure mostly protects slackers, right? That is, so it doesn't make it impossible to fire someone, but it makes it more difficult. It raises the costs. So there are procedures, tedious procedures you have to go through to fire the tenured person, and you have to make up an excuse for why you're firing them, and then they're going to sue you, and then you have to have adjudicated in court and try to defend your excuse, and then they try to prove that it's just a pretext or whatever. Okay, so it raises the bar, and by raising the bar, that makes it so that if somebody is merely slacking off on their job, it's just not worth it to try to fire that person. But it's only worth it to fire somebody if you're pissed off at them because of their political views, or there are all these protesters who are protesting them, then it might be worth it to go through the trouble of trying to fire them, right? So it's good at protecting slackers. It's better at protecting slackers than protecting dissenters, okay? What we should have is we should just have a rule that you can't fire somebody because of the content of their beliefs. And then you can have that adjudicated in court. The other thing is there should be penalties for the individual decision maker who does that, right? Because the way it is now, all right, so if you sue the university for firing you, the university has to pay a bunch of money, but the individual who made the decision doesn't have to pay any money, right? They use the university's money. Okay, so it should be that the individual who made the decision suffers some major cost. Right. Now, I don't expect universities to actually do this, because why would be in their interest? Because it's the administrators who decide what the rules are, so they're not going to make rules so that they themselves are accountable. Right. But if there were to be a university that wanted to establish academic freedom in a real way, they would have it written into people's contracts that you could demand something be done if somebody fires you for your political beliefs. Like you could demand that that person be fired, and then it wouldn't happen, right? And then, you might wonder about, and just like, okay, well, that's about academics, but maybe we should have that for all employers, But you'd have to have a society that valued free speech a lot, right? For it to be profitable to have provisions like that. And I'm just not sure that our society values free speech enough.
Yeah, sadly. So we've kind of jumped around the houses quite a lot today. There's been a lot in this conversation. So I want to kind of bring it into a nutshell that we can give to somebody, like the takeaway message. And we've probably already touched on most of these points before, Professor Huemer, but I think it'd be good just to wrap it up in a bow. So what are the practical steps that individuals or potentially societies, so that might be more complicated, so let's stick with individuals. So what practical steps can individuals take to kind of protect themselves from being taken in by progressive myths? Like what are the sort of core facts someone should walk away from this conversation holding on to?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that people should just be a lot more skeptical when they hear politically relevant information. So you hear some information that appears to support a particular kind of ideological orientation. And, a way to assess that is to think to yourself, like, here's a story, here's a news story that I heard, or a factoid that I heard. Would I expect this? Who would I expect to be propounding this? Who would I expect to be repeating this, sharing it, whatever? Would I expect that only Democrats would repeat this? In that case, it's ideologically slanted. Or would I expect that only Republicans would repeat it? Okay. And so if you hear something that's ideologically slanted in that sense, you should just be aware that most things like that are either false or highly misleading. And if you haven't looked into it, you probably can't imagine the specific way that it's highly misleading. Like I've had this happen repeatedly. Like you hear something and you're like, wow, that really strongly supports this side. I think I'll go look into that more. And then you find out there's just like some, there's some facts like surrounding context that just completely undermines the argument that would be given, right? So, okay. You should be aware of that. And then, therefore you should just try to get information from other sides. If there's a controversial issue and there's some fact that seems to very strongly support one side, the fact that the issue is controversial means that the other side probably has something to say about that. That's probably, like a reasonable explanation of why they're not persuaded by that. So, and then, just take account of my earlier points about assessing who's trustworthy, right? This was another thing that I didn't mention. Like people who are overly emotional are less likely to be trustworthy. You can often just sort of like, you read some text and you can often see if it's just like full of emotionally charged words. That might mean that the person who's writing it can't control their emotions. If they can't control their emotions for the purpose of writing the text, maybe they can't control their emotions for the purpose of forming their beliefs, which means that maybe they're not reliable. I'm not saying definitely they're wrong, but you got to be more cautious in that case.
I love it. And I loved the book, Progressive Myths. It'll be linked in the description, as well your Substack, Professor Huemer. But once again, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, mate. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great talking to you, as always.
Cheers. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed it and are on YouTube or Rumble, please like, subscribe, and then hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a new episode. And don't forget to check out our community over on Locals. Cheers.